Pledge if you're able. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Roll call, please.
Mr. Janik?
Here.
Ms. Janice Doyle? Mr. Kirking?
Here.
Mr. Lacine? Mr. Lucetti?
Here.
Mrs. Stokes?
Here.
Mr. Kostick?
Here. We have no one signed up for public comment, but before moving forward, Mr. Kirking, you get to be Secretary Pro Temp tonight, and let's move on to our presentations.
Good evening. For the next 47 minutes, I'm going to entertain you with some data on an assessment.
Slow down, we need snacks. 47 minutes.
Tonight I'm going to share with you some information with regards to data as it pertains to the assessments that our students took in the spring this past year. So those are the SAT that was taken in April, along with the PSAT 9 and 10, and also the AP exams that were given in May of 22. Before we begin into this data, I just want to kind of sum up where we ended the school year with regards to our student body. On the last day of school, we had just over 6,500 students in our 3 buildings. That does not include our students that are outplaced at other places. It comes out to be about 1950 at Central, 1950 at West, and 2,600 at East. This past school year, there was significant increases in the areas of special ed and EL, and those numbers are important to keep in the back of your mind as we continue to look at our test scores later on in the presentation. So to begin, just as a reminder, what we provided this past year for our students. This last year, we provided 2 opportunities for our students to prepare for the SAT. In the fall, our juniors and sophomores took the PSAT and MSQT in October. Our freshmen took the PSAT 9 in September. Those tests really allowed our students to get a preview of what the SAT was going to look like come the spring, seeing as the last time a lot of these students took an assessment was their 8th grade year. These assessments were then followed up in the spring with all 3 grade levels taking the PSAT 9 or the PSAT 10 or the SAT. So the first class that we're going to take a quick peek at is our class of 23 and analysis of their SAT. As you can see on the chart, each of our buildings has showed a growth from fall to spring of at least 50 points. So you can see the appropriate numbers up there on the screen, 62, 67, and 53. This is significant as we look at this as only a 6-month period of time. It is almost exactly 6 months to the day that the students took the PSAT and MSQT to the SAT. During that time, College Board says that you should grow somewhere around 30 points as a composite score from the fall to the spring. They say 60 points over a 12-month period, so 30 points over a 6-month would be appropriate. When you compare us to the state of Illinois from the fall to spring only grew by 8 points. We've broken down these scores much further than what I'm presenting here this evening. We break it down into 2 separate categories, into the math and to the evidence-based reading and writing. We then continue breaking it down by courses that are being taught, just to kind of see where our students are falling and how we might be able to help future students in those courses. While we're encouraged by the growth in these scores of what we see here up on the screen, we do not get graded or evaluated based upon the score, but instead we get graded on the percentage of students that are meeting the benchmarks set forth by the state of Illinois. So what we see here is the percentage of students meeting both College Board benchmarks, comparing the class of 20 to the class of 21 and the class of 22 and the class of 23. As you can see, these past 2 years, we've showed a decrease in the number of students who have met both benchmarks set by College Board, and the class of 23 shows approximately 50% of all the students meeting the benchmark, an increase of nearly 10% from where we were last year. That's a good adjustment as we get back into the swing of things. These percentages far exceed those of the state. In fact, while all of our Lincoln Way High School is experiencing a rebound in their benchmarks met, the state of Illinois continued to decline. For our students here at Lincoln Way, it's a, yes.
So prior to 2020, those lines, were they always kind of above 60?
We were right at that 60, yep.
All right, so we're not
quite there yet.
We're almost, yeah, okay.
We're not quite there yet, but I think that we're on the right track, right?
I have a.
Yep.
I'm sorry. I have a quick question. I'm sorry. I'm following along, but what slide are you on? I think I'm there, but I just want to make sure.
It's the line graph that has.
Yes, got it.
Line, page 5, yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. For our students here at Lincoln Way, it's apparent that when our students are in school on a regular basis and without disruption, we're performing at a much better level than we have in the past. This summer, we've continued to work to identify students that do not meet, to determine what interventions or curriculum or assistance is needed to help students reach the benchmarks that are set by the state. The necessary changes will continue to be implemented with students that are performing at similar levels for the upcoming years. One thing to note is that what we see up here is our students that met the benchmarks that are set by College Board. They're going to be different from what we see in October, when the numbers come out in October, because the state has a different level of benchmarks. We use the college benchmarks because the PSAT 9, 10, and the SAT are all aligned. So if we're using those same benchmarks, it gives us a better idea of where our students are heading and the direction that they're going, and it helps us to identify those that are in further need of assistance. To give a general idea of how we look, this chart here compares assessment performance from year to year and also from class to class. So we look at, in the yellow are the current scores for the class of 23, 24, and 25. And so once again, we see that our class of 23 has grown by 65 points from fall to spring, and also an overall improvement of the score as compared to students in the class of 22 of 21 points. Sophomore year, on the PSAT 10, the students grew by 12 points, and the PSAT 9, the students grew by 67. The results of these assessments have been analyzed as well, and they provide us with the opportunity to identify the students who are either strengthening or approaching the benchmark, so that we can continue to work with those students to help them reach the benchmark that's going to be set forth by the state for this upcoming school year. Once again, we'll be providing opportunities for our students during the 22-23 school year. On September 28th, our freshman class will take the PSAT 9, and on October 12th, our sophomores and juniors will take the NMSQT. These opportunities, again, are going to allow our students to become even more familiar with the SAT and to provide us with more data to provide that benchmark information that we're looking for. These will be followed up in the spring with all 3 grade levels participating in the state-mandated PSAT 9, 10, and SAT on April 12th and 13th. And then this entire school year, all standardized assessments will be conducted via the traditional method of paper and pencil. Beginning next fall, all assessments will be digital, will be conducted online. So that will be the fall of 23, and the SAT for the first time in the spring of 24 will be an online assessment. Moving on to AP testing. AP exams occurred over the first 2 weeks of May and were administered in this normal fashion using paper and pencil. As you can see in the chart above, we had administered just over 4,000 exams during that 2-week period, and an increase of about 300 exams as compared to last year. The overall performance saw a slight increase in the percentage of students who earned a 3, 4, or 5 on the exam of 63%. Last year it was at 60%. To celebrate a little bit further, the percentage of students who enrolled in an AP class and earned a passing score increased from 39% in 2021 to 50% this past year. So those students who were enrolled in the class, of the 5,000 students, 50% of them ended up earning a 3, 4, or 5 on an AP exam. We continue to encourage our students to take an AP class, and even more so, we encourage them to take the corresponding AP exam. You never know what's going to happen, and that's what our teachers are doing. Our teachers are preparing these students to take those AP exams When we see an increase like this from a 39% to 50%, we know that our teachers are really reaching to the students and helping them get prepared for these exams. As we look at the success rates of our students, they continue to excel on all AP exams. This year, we had 264 students earning the status of just an AP Scholar. And as a reminder, that's just earning a 3 or better on a minimum of 3 exams. We had 98 earn AP Scholar with honors, passing 4 or more exams and maintaining a 3.25 average, and 190 earning an AP Scholar with distinction, passing 5 or more exams and maintaining a 3.5. Overall, 552 students were being recognized as some type of AP Scholar. The hard work of these students has certainly paid off. And as a credit that they earned, it gets transferred to whatever post-secondary school or wherever they decide to go. I'd also like to highlight some of the AP Scholars that have truly excelled during their time here at Lincoln Way. These students have earned a 4 or higher on 8 or more total AP exams. As you can see up on the screen, they're color-coded. Red Central, blue East, oranges is West, and there's 2 that are highlighted. The numbers next to their name represent the number of exams that they took, but the 2 students that are highlighted are now current seniors. So last year they were juniors, and they earned this distinction of an AP Scholar who excel. We are proud of all the accomplishments of all of our students on both the AP exams and on the SAT. We thank our teachers for the support in helping our students to be successful on both of these exams.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
If there's no questions for Brian, can we move on to the fiscal year 2023 tentative budget? Are you there, Mike?
I'm here. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right. I wish I could be there tonight. Thank you for letting me call in. I had
We're
thought
happy
about
to have
coming,
you at
so
home if you're.
I got myself dressed.
COVID.
I'm in dress shoes and cufflinks in my basement, if that makes you guys feel
that's
better.
great.
So I'm prepared for tonight's meeting.
Now that's funny.
I'm going to walk through the PowerPoint. I will speak back and forth between points that are in the PowerPoint as well as the board cover memo. So I just ask that you follow along in the slides. I will try to reference the slide I'm on. And obviously I can't see your faces, but I'm going to walk through this, assuming we can do some questions at the end. But stop me if you have questions that make sense to ask along the way. And a lot of what I'm going to talk through, obviously, as you can see in the agenda tonight, there are a lot of items that are related and overlapping. And so I'll try to speak to all those here in this presentation. If you can pull up the PowerPoint and go to slide 2. The all funds FY23 tentative budget on paper does look a little unusual, but I want to put you at ease right away. Everything's okay. Due to both revenue and expenditure timing differences, which I'll explain throughout the presentation, and those related agenda items during the meeting. On slide 3, I did want to explicitly mention some great news off the bat, and that's related to some of those timing pieces. You as a board, we have accomplished your fund balance policy goal of 33% of operating expenses to end fiscal year 22. And I'll speak to that more during my treasurer's report, but that impacts this fiscal year's budget as well. The operating budget surplus tentatively here tonight is a surplus of $1.6 million with just over a 1.5% operating surplus. And I do want to note that this tentative budget, if it came to fruition perfectly, maintains a 33% operating fund balance. On slide 5, just a reminder of the timeline. I know that this is standard for a lot of the board, but just for reference's sake, you'll see unaudited year-end balances presented today in the treasurer's report, and then a request to place this budget on display with the hearing and adoption in September. Moving forward to slide 7, again, the budget development steps are the same as in previous years, and I like to include this for reference's sake. before we make adjustments from June, July, August, and then if and as necessary through to the final budget in September. Let's get into the financials a little bit on slide 9. And no, this is not a typo. From fiscal year 21 to fiscal year 22, the revenues really did increase that much, and some of that was known. If you'll remember, in FY21, there were no food sales. EBF was lower at the time, evidence-based funding, as well as some of our CPPRT revenues and things like that. Transportation was not operating fully, so the feeder district reimbursements were not there. So that speaks a lot to the local revenue, and all of this led to the increase in FY22. But the most important piece that I want to talk about is the timing of the property tax distributions. Some months ago, we had talked about the FY22 having some delayed tax receipts from FY21. It's about $5.7 million that was expected in 21 that we got in 22. A similar thing happened. We spoke about this at the June board meeting. We got about $2.3 million of money that we expected here in this 23 fiscal year earlier than anticipated. And that's just based on historical trends of when taxpayers, pay their bills and when we get the receipts. It's not a perfect science, but just on those historical trends, if you take a look at 22, it had in it more than $5 million of late receipts from 21 and over $2 million of early receipts from 23. And so what that causes is this seesaw effect. You can't see more detail on this slide, but instead of the $96.7 million jumping to 121 you see there in local and then down to 114, if these things kind of evened themselves out, we would be looking at 102, 112, 118. And so from a collection standpoint, we're doing a great job. Will County is very good. Our taxpayers are paying their bills. It just causes this seesaw effect on paper. By getting those receipts early, the piece I wanted to mention with your fund balance policy, it built up our fund balance. And so we hit that goal. That gives us more flexibility in the FY23 budget because the 3% operating surplus that you've all asked us to budget until we hit that goal, we've now got more flexibility now. If we had not gotten those revenues last year, maybe we didn't reach 33% for another year or two, but we would have been budgeting those revenues and making sure we had a higher surplus this year. So it's just offsetting. Moving forward to slide 11, that summarizes some of the same thing that I wanted to say, but if you do recall, the point I wanted to make here on this slide is in the last 5 casts that I presented to you all, we had already built in that planned dip of 1.7% in operating revenue this year. And so now with the $2.3 million swing from 22 to 23, that's just exasperated a bit on paper. Mr. Lucetti, I think it was you who had mentioned something recently about cash versus accrual, and I think you've got exactly the right lens on this. I don't mind either system, and as we discussed at that meeting, I'm not sure if it's worth switching overall, but this is a great reason for us to highlight some of these timing differences. If we don't, it doesn't give us the full picture from one fiscal year to the next. So I think that's a smart way to be looking at it. Moving forward to slide 13. Slide 13 highlights some of the fund-by-fund revenue changes from June's preliminary budget to today. Again, most of these changes are large buckets due to timing, but one piece I do want to highlight is Fund 20 and Fund 40. We have sufficient funds now in our operating funds not to borrow. However, as I bring in updated cash flow in September with the final budget, I had anticipated needing to do an interfund loan during fiscal year 23 at some point out of working cash. We did that last year in FY22 into the education fund and then just repay it prior to June. However, I took a look at the fund-specific surpluses and I restructured how I plan to bring this upcoming December's tax levy to you, putting more into O&M and less into transportation. And I say this because I want you as the board to feel assured that, behind the scenes, of course, we're keeping the operating budget as a whole on the front burner, but we're also taking strategic steps to ensure that each singular fund is taken care of in its own right. And so that's the swing there in 20 and 40. If you look at slide 14, this just highlights some of the specific revenue decreases, as I think those were the most noteworthy. And one that I wanted you to see here was this transfer of funds. In June, we had brought a 3% operating surplus with $3 million to pre-fund capital improvements for next summer. Because of that revenue swing, we've now reduced that to $1.75 million. But there's a related conversation later about a transfer of funds that we're backdating from June 30th and incorporating some of that, again, to offset. Obviously, the levy down, as I had mentioned. Private facility is mostly due to timing and it's expense related. So those reimbursements, our expenses last year came in a little bit lower. So we've reduced the reimbursement revenue. And then you'll see about a little past halfway down, refund of PY, that's prior year expenditures. This is very inconsistent each year, and I want to be a little more conservative here. I think that's the smart way to go. Any questions on revenues before I move forward to expenditures?
Go ahead, Mike.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Slides 16 and 17 highlight both all fund and operating fund expenditures. You can see that expenses last year actual to this year budget are up 9.18%, all funds. That's primarily due to bond payments, which I'll elaborate on in a minute. And operating is up 5.67%. If you move forward to slide 19, salaries here are in line. And benefits, I do want the board to be aware that obviously, we've had a real tough year for medical claims, and they're settling down a little bit. This is probably a conservative budget for benefits, to be honest. I'm basically assuming that we would be at or very near that level. The likelihood that we repeat a year as bad as we had, I'm hopeful that we don't. But just given how far over budget we were in medical expenses, I did want to make sure that we had enough money set aside to pay those bills if they come in anywhere near where they were. If you look from the preliminary budget, I'm going column by column here, the preliminary budget over to the tentative budget, you'll notice that supplies have been increased. This is in three areas primarily: food sales, food supplies, fuel, and our utilities. Really what I've done with Chuck Welke, Mike Leone, Kristen Procaro, in terms of these supplies, we spend a lot of money in these areas. And right now, with inflation being where it is and the costs being high, this budget assumes that we would stay at those same rates. And so if the price of gas and diesel comes down substantially throughout the course of the fiscal year, great, then we're in better shape financially. But I wanted to make sure that that was assumed. On slide 20, you can see that these are the most significant expenditure increases from an account level. Some of these are instructional salaries. I do want to note that I've taken salary budgeting a little bit different. I'm doing it position by position. So some of this is offsetting in other accounts. But I did want to note, as the board knows, in terms of staffing changes, that we have increased and we are supporting our special education areas throughout the district in supports and instructions. So we've added FTEs, as you know, in those areas. And then District 843 tuition is up, and that's a later agenda item. Again, we typically pay these tuition bills and then get a refund. They've got a little bit higher budget to actual variance than we do. And some of that's just the predictability of special education costs. Or lack thereof, I should say, lack of predictability. Moving forward to slide 22. This highlights a $2.9 million all funds deficit. But again, if you take a look at the FY22 actual all funds, that surplus is encompassing of the bond refunding that you all did in the middle of last fiscal year. And because you did a forward delivery, the tax levy was already in motion. So we got the revenues. And those are currently sitting in our debt service fund balance. And so that expense, when we close on October 5th, that will be expensed at closing, and that's part of the process of the forward delivery. So that's anticipated. That's nothing of concern. It's just, again, a timing piece. If you look at slide 23, you will see a $1,595,000. I'm looking at the bottom right corner. $1,595,259 operating surplus, and so that's just over 1.5%, and that maintains our 33% fund balance. I had mentioned that brings me to the end of the slides. I did want to mention just a couple of things from the cover memo. And this is just showing, and I'd like to highlight how fluid all of this is. On page 2 of the cover memo, if you take a look, obviously I'm not going to hit each piece because I've talked through it in the slides. But on page 2, CPPRT, in FY21, we received more, and I remember discussing this with Mr. Coffin. We received about $800,000, and even that number was higher than we thought at the time. And so when initially presenting the budget to you last August and September, we had incorporated about $900,000. Well, we ended up getting $1.8 million. So that's great. In my budget in June, I had said, well, we're not going to repeat that feat. We're going to return to normal levels. I had put it at $1.4 million. In my work with other people that do what I do and in networking with other districts, no one thought we would get anywhere near that level again. So we brought that back down in this tentative budget to $1 million. I was talking with Dr. Tingley earlier today, and usually during early to mid-August, they release their estimates. The Illinois Department of Revenue releases their estimates for FY23. And I just found out today that instead of $1 million, we'll be getting nearly $2 million in CPPRT. So that's already a substantial change, even from what I'm speaking to tonight, and it's a good one. But that just shows how fluid all of this is. Just a couple bullet points down, evidence-based funding. Those estimates have come out, and so I increased that $300K. And then transportation fees, I did adjust up. As we've seen some higher expenses, we've got capital improvements and a new roof down there. But those revenues are offsetting from the expenses that we face. So on page 3, on the next page, just some salary and benefits notes. I don't expect any of these things to be material. I think they should be very, very minor if anything changes between now and September. But we have seen personnel changes, hires, resignations through today. And so that continues to be kind of a late evolving cycle this year, and it has been the whole spring. On page 5, I just wanted to highlight one last thing here, that our budget obviously is a guideline. None of these revenues and expenses will come exactly as I have predicted, but if we end the year better, I know I've allocated here $1.75 million for capital improvements transfer in fiscal year 23. If we end the year better again, the board could choose, if you so see fit, to pre-fund or make some different decisions for transfers, or we could leave it in Fund 20 reserves and maybe plan some extra spending from that fund. But that would be something you'd have to okay, and we can cross that bridge when we get there. That kind of is the summary and the highlight of the tentative budget. I'm happy to take any questions or comments if you have them.
Anyone?
So,
I'm sorry, go ahead, Chris.
yeah. Going back to the healthcare expenses, and I'm perfectly fine with the, using that same number over 12 million, whatever it was. But is just out of curiosity, is that annual cap going to come into play, and would that significantly impact that number to the positive side for us?
That's a really good question. Unfortunately, I don't have the answer you're looking for. Well, I have an answer. It's just not the one you're hoping for, I should say. I've been working with Stum Insurance. We've been tracking our claims. Our claims have settled. We're somewhere around 800 to 850,000 a month right now, Chris. And if we were to continue this trend through December, because remember that aggregate stop loss is on a calendar year basis, we will not hit the 130% aggregate stop loss. And so what I've built is an assumption that we have a year like we just had, where some of these huge spikes don't happen until January and February, because that's really the worst case scenario, right? They stay just high enough through December that claims are expensive, but we don't benefit from the stop loss. They settle down enough. And then come January, when that stop loss resets, it assumes a couple of bad months, because January, February, March were kind of our worst months last fiscal year. So that didn't work out to our favor for calendar year 21. So, Chris, I'm not predicting we're going to hit it, but I am budgeting based on that assumption.
And I have to, you already did it for me, but I'll put in my plug for accrual-based accounting. I think this is like Exhibit A. When you're a board trying to manage through this, yes, we can go through and describe it all the time, but when you go back and look at these things and they're on a cash basis and you want to compare prior years, it becomes very difficult because you have to remember all of those things and have it, some sort of record of it, which defeats the purpose of financial statements. And I don't know, that's just my plug again. And then I guess...
Yeah, I think that's it. Go ahead, Chris, sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just going to ask, I guess we'll talk about the capital projects fund transfer later. Can you explain again the bond refunding when you said it was going to take place on October 5th? Or
yeah,
what that process is?
October 5th is the hard close. And that's because technically what we're doing is we're refunding. And again, this is based on levy year, right? And so what the board is doing is you're reducing that stair step moving forward, of course, as you know, right? And we're flattening the debt burden. But one of the pieces with the hard closing to then restructure for, now I need to say this correctly, levy year 22, which is calendar year 23 tax bills for all of us as taxpayers. To lower that, the hard close has to be within, I think, 90 days of January 1st, right? And so the hard close is on October 5th, which I know I don't speak as articulate on this matter as Bob Luce does, but that's why we did the forward delivery. Is J.P. Morgan was willing to lock in that rate, and we factored in the whole restructuring plan. Last year's tax levy already accounted for the full stair step this year, and the refunding is going to lower that, but that extra money that we got is going to offset and go into the entire kind of package, if you will, and be spent here in October. It's not like a future July 1st or January 1st bond payment, but it's baked into the calculations of that refunding, if you will.
Got it. Yeah, so it's the J.P. Morgan contract that we entered into in January or February.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
It's the J.P. Morgan forward contract we entered into in January or February of this year.
Yes, sir. Yeah,
Okay.
The big $130 million refunding. Yeah. This is just a piece of it, but because the revenues were received in 22 and then we're spending them at the closing in 23, that only adds to this, to your point about this goofy timing on paper crossing fiscal years.
And just because I don't know what all is in supplies here, but I see we have a pretty healthy increase built in and the expenses. But do you know how much of that is related to utilities? Just looking at, I think the utility report in here, the natural gas was up like 140%. I was just curious how much of the supply, how much are we putting in, like, what's the increase on utilities that we're assuming in that big supply increase?
While we're waiting for him to call, was the sale of capital assets added back in here somewhere?
Can you guys hear me?
Oh, never mind, he's back.
Yes, we can. You mean the
Hello?
land, Joe? Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you. Okay.
Oh, my apologies. I just gave Chris a really long and wonderful answer. But I think I was
No,
on
I
mute.
heard you.
No, we heard
No,
most. We
I heard you.
Yeah, we heard most of it.
Oh, Deidre,
Or we
thanks.
did, we not?
So,
Yeah.
Okay, which question,
You were not
Chris?
on
I'm so sorry.
All right.
So you all heard me or just Deidre?
No, just Deidre. So one more time, Chris.
Oh,
Okay.
the people on the
Oh,
phone.
my apologies. My apologies. So, Chris, what I was saying is I would have to dig a little bit deeper to get to utilities specifically. But the budget book attachment that's provided with this presentation, the budget book details some of these expenses not only by object but then by fund. Okay, so I can provide that to the board in detail in September when I bring the final budget, or give it to Dr. Tingley to share out with all of you. But if you go to the operations and maintenance fund in terms of supplies, and in the budget book, that is page 26. You can see that supplies, it breaks it apart by function code. And so I'm trying to see here, utilities, they are either a contractual service and or a supply. So you'll have to look at 300s and 400s. Chris, what I think I'd like to do, if it's okay with you, is I can break apart food supplies, utilities, gasoline and diesel with Mike Leone, and I can itemize that more for you all in September when I give the final budget. Would that be okay?
Yeah, that's great. I was just trying to figure out how much of the 30% increase it was making up, so that's good.
If you take a look at the invoices later under action items, you can see, for example, that we are currently spending, like for electricity, there's 2 months and it's $200,000. So we're spending about $100,000 a month on electricity. And I'm trying to find that. I apologize. I'm trying to work on the fly here for you. Fuel costs are about $133,000 a month. And then there it is, natural gas. 2 months is about $92,000. So you'd be looking about $46,000 a month for natural gas. So when you factor in a percentage increase like we've seen, what I'm doing with fuel, what I'm doing with natural gas and electricity, and what I'm doing with our food supplies is I'm not, if you take a look at fiscal year 21, those things didn't start fiscal year 21 the way they ended, or 22, excuse me. They didn't start fiscal year 22 the way they ended fiscal year 22. And so what I'm budgeting for now is if we continue the rate of doing business in these areas as of, April, May, and June, if all of those rates stay at that level, that's what I've budgeted for. That might be conservative, but I would rather approach it from that standpoint and say gas, natural gas, gasoline, and food will stay at that level. And again, like I said earlier, if it comes down, all the better.
Joe, your question in terms of the sale of 191st and Harlem, that was completed prior to June 30th, so that would have been in last year's, and so that was placed into fund balance and will be shown on the audit this year.
Good.
And I do speak to that in my treasurer's report later. When I tried to start doing some of the cash flow variance in June, obviously for all the reasons we've been discussing, it was all over the place. But I did not mention separately the sale of land at $1.5 million, and as Scott said, that was recorded pre-June 30th.
Yes. Michael, you had mentioned that the CPPRT, you had actually gotten some numbers since you prepared this. So it was a seven-figure variance. Will you account for that somewhere in this, or are we just going to go as it is and show it as a positive variance?
Well, what I would do, and so my philosophy, and I assume it's yours also, is I like to make this tentative budget tonight about as final as I can make it, because it's the one that's going on public display. I don't want to take something from a 2% surplus to a 4% deficit that I bring in September, things like that. But at the same time, if there are differences that I know, and I know for a fact between now and the September meeting, during that budget hearing, I will, not only will I am required to explicitly state them and outline them, and they'll be factored into the final budget that I bring for September. So unless any of you feel differently, or you'd rather me leave the number alone, what I would like to do for CPPRT, just to use that as the example, is I'll adjust that number now. Obviously, it was too late for tonight's presentation, but I'll adjust that number and make mention of that, and that'll become part of the adopted budget once you guys vote on it in September.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else on the tentative budget?
Not necessarily on the budget, but you brought up that cash versus accrual. I mean, this is $100 million now plus budget, and for 5 years we've used words like moving parts and fluid and other things that have created this crossover. I just think somewhere at the point we've at least got to study the idea of taking it from cash to accrual, or some form of modified accrual, or some cash modified accrual, or accrual cash modified, or.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think with the timing of everything, obviously with our previous business manager, who we knew was here for a couple of years to help stabilize things, there was more resistance. Mike and I have discussed that, and I think that's something that we'll continue to bring back in conversation. To his point, there's just too many footnotes when you're trying to compare year over year over year. And it's impossible for us to remember every footnote and every timing of everything. Whereas if we were going back and the audit had it right there, black on white, here were the changes, and here's your starting point for the new year and why. So I do think Mike's more open to it. We're at a point to have some of those conversations and work with our auditors to do that. And that's something we will bring back to the board here in the upcoming meetings.
It's a painful process. It's not going to be easy, but once it's done, everybody would, your natural instinct would think that cash is easier to understand because it's in your pocket, you spend it.
Sure.
But over time, accrual is actually how you digest the information. So.
I think that's a fair point to say how we digest it, and maybe a modified accrual or somewhere in the middle is something would be a sensible place to land. But what I'd like to do to Dr. Tingley's point is I'd like to consult and work with Kelly and our auditors a little bit. There are obviously pros and cons, and so I'd like some recommendations. We can do a bit of research and circle back with you all.
Thank you. Moving on to the consent agenda, which includes the approval of the regular meeting and closed meeting minutes of June 16th, 2022, approval of the payrolls of June 17th, July 5th, July 20th, and August 5th of 2022, personnel reports, and approval of the 2022-23 hazardous busing recertification. Would anyone like anything pulled from the consent agenda for discussion? If not, I'd entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Linda, if you'd open the vote, please.
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
Thank you. Moving on to the action items. First up, presentation of invoices for June 17th through August 11th, 2022.
Motion to approve the invoices in the amount of $8,477,845.03 dated August 11th, 2022.
Thank you. I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Do I have a second by Mr. Janik? Any discussion or questions?
The Denler payment for the seal coating and striping, they were supposed to do some other work, weren't they?
Correct. This is just the portion for the seal coating and striping. We have not yet done the asphalt back in the back yet, but the seal coating and striping has been completed.
And we're not gonna do that portion this year?
Still waiting to see. Chuck, do we think we're gonna get the pavement done this fall, or?
We'll do it before the snow comes.
Okay,
We settled on the strike, so we're in line.
we're in line. Yep.
Thank you. I have a motion, a second. If there's nothing further, I see, Linda, you've already opened the vote.
The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
Thank you. The treasurer's report for June 2022.
So I've already talked through a lot of this. I'll be pretty succinct. Obviously, we know we have the yearly revenue, $54.6 million, and that was mentioned in the budget book earlier, is the total cash balance across all funds. Year-to-date budget report in terms of the final revenues were, again, across three areas: property taxes, CPPRT, and evidence-based funding was what was high on the revenue side. And then from an expense standpoint, we've seen continued delays, and some of the supply chain piece is now starting to affect us, and we're having to pay for those now on the books in FY23. That has already been factored into the budget. As I mentioned earlier, the medical claims are leveling out. Investments, good news. Things are pointing up. Janine, Kelly, and I have worked with PMA in terms of PMA and ISLAF investment opportunities. We've laddered in 3, 6, 9, and 12 months, and we hope to have some better investment returns for 23. I think it was Joe maybe earlier who had mentioned, but here's in the cash flow section of this, here's that mention of the sale of land for 1.5, and so that did hit. And that's kind of all I have on the treasurer's reports. Looking ahead, I'll update the FY23 cash flow, and that'll be presented along with the final budget next month.
Thank you. Any questions for Mike? If not, I'd entertain a motion to approve the treasurer's report for June of 2022 as presented.
So moved.
Have a motion? Second. I have a motion and a second by Mr. Lucetti. Linda, if you'd open the vote, please.
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
Thank you. Moving on to student activities report for June and July of 2022.
Student activity reports for June and July are in your backup materials. Of significance, June 30th, there were no student activity fund balances in the red, so we won't get any write-ups on the audit from that. July, there was just one due to timing differences of some fundraising activities. So I'd ask you to approve the student activity reports as presented.
Thank you. Could I get a motion?
Move.
I have a motion and a second. If there are no questions, Linda, if you'd open the vote, please.
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
Thank you. Moving on to the District 843 fiscal year 2023 budget.
Included in your backup materials is the District 843 budget for the upcoming school year. Most importantly, Mike has taken all the information from this, built it into our budget. If there are any specific questions, Mike and I would do the best that we could to answer them. But I know Mike and Kelly and Laura have gone through their budget, and we've built it into our expenses for the upcoming year.
If there are no questions, I'd entertain a motion to approve the District 843 fiscal year 2023 budget as presented.
I have a quick question.
Yep.
Can they, we're gonna prepare our budget and then bring it back in September. Are they doing the same thing, or?
So the way this works for the cooperatives is all of the entities have to approve the portion, their portion in August, so that they can approve in September to meet the deadlines. Yeah.
So then this should stay pretty true then for them?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. As true
Yes,
as we expect it.
we've been working on it quite a bit. This is Deidre. They've been working on it, and it's been presented quite a bit in the meetings.
Excellent. If there's nothing further, I'd entertain a motion to approve the District 843 fiscal year 2023 budget as presented.
So moved.
Second,
First, second, third. Linda, if you'd open the vote, please.
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
Thank you. Moving on to the intergovernmental agreement between Lincoln Way Area Special Education District 843 and Lincoln Way Community High School District 210 for use of the Mckay Education Center.
Once again, this is something we've done annually since we've taken back programming at the Mckay Center. So this comes from agreement from both attorneys. Every year we go through and review the contract for building usage. So these few suggested changes are in there. The technology, we collectively work together. In terms of the utilities, we do pay those. We also pay for the cleaning. But any large capital improvements or major repair, I wanted it specifically in there that it would be shared by all the units of the 843, as that would be going to the overall upkeep of the building itself and not just the use. So there are a couple of adjustments, but we've done this since we've been operating our program there. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
If there aren't any, I'd entertain a motion to approve the intergovernmental agreement as presented.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Linda, if you'd open the vote, please.
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
Thank you. Moving on to the fiscal year 2023 budget hearing date.
Once again, a formality, we'd ask that the board approve the tentative budget hearing of the tentative budget on the 15th day of September 2022 at 7 o'clock.
Thank you. Could I get a motion?
Move.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Linda, if you'd open the vote, please.
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
Thank you. Moving on to the Independent Inspector General.
The backup material contains a letter from Sikich to continue our relationship as our independent inspector general. This would be, I believe, year 4 for the engagement. So I'd ask the board approve as presented. We only pay when utilized, and once we get to a certain dollar threshold, they notify board president and vice president of what that threshold will be. Any complaints, they also notify board president and vice president. So we would recommend that we continue our engagement with Sikich as our independent inspector general.
Where's the information to contact them located?
Should still be
I
on
was
our
just wondering, because we
website.
haven't had any,
That's a good
No,
point.
it's on our website. It's on our website.
I haven't had any
And that's-
conversations with the stickage folks.
And that's
last
been
couple
that's been a
years.
good thing.
Well,
Yeah,
no,
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 it's
you-
on the website.
It's a good point, because, I mean, we've kind of gone through now a generation of students, if we could say that,
Yeah.
since this was implemented. And there's probably, you know, obviously the community knows it's out there, but people that are actively engaged with the district right now. So we might want to like,
At
just,
an institute, that's a good point.
yeah, just put
Your
it out there,
teachers.
especially with teachers, with parents coming on. Not that we're looking to engage Sickich, because I know Joe really likes having conversations with attorneys. But it's just to, it's a good thing. And based on our history, I think just letting people know it's out there, Chris was right where my mind was, hey, we haven't heard anything, but that could be because it's kind of like nobody knows it's there.
It's under Board of Education, but that's a good point to, and we can do a release as an update to this as well and put it on our social media that we've updated the relationship.
Just with the current onboarding of people coming on, I don't think it has to be fly a plane with a banner over each building, but just a
Just know
reminder that it's
there.
out there.
Yeah,
yeah.
that's a good point.
If there's nothing further, I'd entertain a motion to approve the Inspector General contract as presented.
So moved.
I have a motion and a second. Linda, if you'd open the vote, please.
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
Thank you. Moving on to the ratification of the collective bargaining agreement between the Lincoln Way High School Board of Education District 210 and the Lincoln Way High School Educational Support Professionals, IEA, NEA, the LWESP, for 22 through fiscal year 25.
Your backup material includes the bargaining agreement proposed between the Board of Education and the Lincoln Way Area Support Professionals. Negotiations took place in the end of winter and spring and summer this past year. We kept the board apprised of those negotiations. This is a tentative agreement. The increases in salaries and benefits have been factored into the upcoming budget and the 5-year financial forecast. We would ask the board to approve the tentative bargaining agreement as presented.
I entertain a motion to approve the agreement as presented.
So moved.
I have a motion. Do I have a second? Second. Any questions or discussion?
When does the association vote to ratify, or have they already done that? They've done that?
They have done that, yes.
There's nothing further. Linda, if you'd open the vote, please.
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
Thank you. Moving on to the permanent interfund transfer resolution for capital projects.
Mike, I'll let you give us an overview of the permanent interfund transfer, and then I know there will be some questions from board members.
Sure. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
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 All right. So, thank you. So, obviously, the district, the board began pre-funding capital projects from Fund 20 into Fund 60 a few years ago. And the initial budget during fiscal year 22 to pre-fund for fiscal year 23, which, just as a reminder, that's this summer. That's the projects happening right now. You've already approved them ahead of time with bid awards and things like that. But that was based on this budget amount of $3.45 million. We're doing more work this summer, but that was a combination of ESSER funds, operating expenses, and this budgeted line. Now, again, all these items tonight are overlapping. As we talked about at the June board meeting, we got some additional revenue earlier, and that was $2.3 million in tax revenue plus some additional revenues in other areas, as mentioned before. And so what we would ask the board to do is consider increasing this transfer amount to $6.7 million. And that'll reflect a more accurate picture, Chris, to your point earlier, of the FY22 close and the FY23 budget, because now we've had to reduce that, quote unquote, on paper in this 23 budget for next summer's projects. And so that additional amount would be used as pre-funding, if you will. Any transfer like this can only be done via formal board resolution. And so there's kind of two things I wanted to mention. One was this increase. Since we got the monies earlier, this captures them for next summer without impacting the operating budget this year. And then secondly, both legal counsel and our auditors, we've talked with them, and they've recommended bringing this resolution after the close of the fiscal year with a back date of June 30. And that's because it allows us the clearest picture of the ending surplus. Really, that dollar amount in the budget is simply just a dollar amount in a budget. We use it as a guidepost when we're awarding bids and things like that, as long as we're tracking okay. But doing this with a look back is their kind of preferred way of doing this resolution. So after recording that with June 30th, in other words, it'll hit the FY22 books, and that's been kind of built into all these different reports you've been seeing tonight. We would close FY22, as mentioned earlier, unaudited, with an operating surplus sufficient and the fund balance of 33.15%. So that's where I said the board would reach your target as outlined in Policy 420. So congratulations to you. And then the fiscal impact, just on page 2 there, of that 6.7, that 3.45 million was kind of already scheduled and allocated. So that's funding projects this summer. The remaining 3.25 would then be combined with what I mentioned is in this year's budget. That's 1.75 million. So if you put those together, we'd be looking at about $5 million in projects next year. And that's, again, just an earmarking. That's just a budgeted figure. But that's the reason behind both the timing and the dollar amount of this resolution. Happy to take any questions if you guys have them.
So I agree moving it from operating might, or backdating it to not past year might match up. But my question is, are we almost getting too cute here from the standpoint of we're moving it from Fund 20, and you're going to have to explain to me, Fund 60 seems like it's restricted use or we couldn't transfer back out. Maybe I'm wrong there. But if we're going to be transferring this and we want, I mean, the whole thing with doing these, pre-funding these, and then we would do it in kind of the spring right before the end of the, or make sure we had it when the capital projects were being bid in February, March. You get to see 6 months, et cetera. Here, it seems like you're just moving it and you're losing a little bit of your flexibility. And I'm just wondering if giving up that flexibility, and I know we have, looking at that budget, it's pretty conservative, so I know you've built in some decent cushion, but what's the benefit of this that offsets the loss of flexibility? And maybe you can explain if I'm wrong on Fund 60.
I don't know that there's a right or wrong. I get your point, and actually I understand it pretty well because you're right, Fund 60 is more restricted. So that's a fact. I think my answer, and one side note I want to make, just as you said, conservative budget, yes, I am and have been pretty conservative. One thing I forgot to mention is we had talked previously about no longer using a standalone contingency account, and I didn't speak to that earlier. So just so you all know, that has not been built into the budget per board request. Chris, about your specific question, Fund 60 is more restricted, and I don't think that I would recommend this if we were back 3-4 years ago. Our cash flow was super, super tight. Our fund balance was like 10%. Our operating fund balance. I don't think I would recommend it. For 2 reasons, I'm gonna say this is why I recommend it for now. And we can totally look at doing it differently in the future if you guys want to. I'm certainly open to that. I need to do a little research on what some different options are. But the reason for the recommendation now is twofold. One, we have enough operating cash balances and fluidity. Again, I'm hoping to avoid any interfund loans, even just between operating funds during the year with working cash. If we have to do it, that's no big deal, but I don't even think we'll need that, let alone borrowing money. But then and you're right, if we leave it in Fund 20 and some emergency happens, that's an operating fund. On the flip side, though, if we don't transfer this money with a back date of June 30 now, it's not like it becomes fiscal year 23 revenue, because these were revenues still received last fiscal year. So what they would do is they would build up Fund 20's fund balance, which would make it even higher, and that's great. But in terms of fiscal year 23 revenues and expenses, if we then get to, like you mentioned, later into the fall and early winter, and you guys are looking to do capital improvements, and you're saying, do we have the money to do $5 million in projects? My answer would be, absolutely we do. However, that would be $5 million in expenses, fiscal year 23 expenses, to pre-fund, but the revenues aren't there recorded this year. So on paper, that would again look like kind of a multi-million-dollar swing here in Fund 20. And that's something I'm not sure you guys are okay with. Maybe you are. But my recommendation is we would look, let's, and it's just my 2 cents from my vantage point, would be something totally open to. We can see what kind of different flexibility we have to leave it in a more open fund moving forward at this time next year. But because the revenues were received pre-June 30th, they would just sit in fund balance versus being recorded as revenue. Long answer, but that's why we're recommending doing it now. And I think we're okay from a cash balance standpoint.
So the benefit is on our financial statements for 23, we wouldn't have to show it as an expense, operating expense.
That is correct. And so therefore the 1.5 million, or 1.6 million dollar surplus we have operating, if you had to record it as the expense, we'd be looking at, 2 million and whatever that it comes out to be deficit, right? And that's not something that I wanted to bring forward and wouldn't recommend for this year's budget. But if that's something the board wants to become, open to, knowing that we have the fund balances there, we can take a look at that for the future. But yeah, that is the reason for the resolution recommendation tonight.
When the land was sold at 191st and Harlem, what fund did that money go into?
20.
That's a more logical case, based on where we've been trying to go with this, was to maintain the flexibility that Chris was discussing, that if you sell a capital asset and you want to move it into a capital improvement account, kind of takes it out of the operating flow. I'm struggling, Michael, just a little bit, and again, this is, 4 or 5, 6 years of working to get to this point of now giving back the flexibility, even though we know that there's 33% in reserves and that you've created a budget that shows that there's a surplus. So I'm wrapping my brain around what you said, but in my mind, I'm saying that if of half of the $3 million actually was quote unquote revenue generated from the sale of a capital asset, it makes sense to have that put into the capital improvements account.
I mean, what we're talking about here.
Well, I agree with you, and I agree with you, and just to respond to that, I apologize if I just interrupted someone. There's a little echo. I agree with you, and so where this was initially, just shy of $3.5 million, and we're recommending 6.7. That's a little bit of the property tax revenue, but that's also that $1.5 million in that sale of land, because the sale of land is for capital improvements, and I think that's the point you're trying to make, Joe. Am I correct? Because that's part of why the number is what it is. That added to our surplus for FY22, especially in Fund 20. But happened in 22, so that's part of this backdating resolution to make sure it would get transferred over into 60. So, am I hitting your question okay?
Yeah, no, you were summarizing much more eloquently than what I said.
I don't know about that, but good, okay.
I guess I'll just throw out my cautionary tale here, is just watch this as you move forward. The wind won't always be at your back, and it won't always be downhill. Because if we've learned anything over the last 7 or 8 years, we don't know what we don't know.
And it also makes a case for the accrual accounting that we were just talking about earlier.
And that's actually a very fair point. So one of the things still, and I think this is a good board philosophy, is we're doing this, to your point, the sale of land. Like, there's some reasons to do this now, and to Chris's earlier point about cash and accrual, just because of the timing of everything. However, do this transfer now. $3.45 million of it was already scheduled. That's for this summer. We need that amount for sure. The additional goes into fund next year's projects. Well, if our year trends tighter, remember there's a $1.75 million budgetary line built into this budget. And so, Chris, to your point, watching 6 months of trend data, right? We get time, and it's time to award bids. We're not trending well on medical claims, or something else is kind of higher than anticipated, be that the supplies we talked about. Well, then at that point, we simply award fewer bids and don't transfer that 1.75. That's okay too. And I think that's a good piece the board has put in place with the pre-funding, is it does give us that flexibility.
Yeah, I mean, I understand this whole thing. I mean, it's not a problem because the revenue came in early, right, before a fiscal year, and we're using cash basis. And now, if we don't do this transaction, because we all know what we're doing, right? If we don't do this transaction, you end up with a negative operating, account in what year are we? Fiscal 2023, which, after having 8+ years, or whatever, however many years we've had positive, that hurts. But I always struggle when we're doing an accounting issue that takes away some of our flexibility, because this is truly just an accounting issue. And again, we're talking about, we're talking about this like 5 times today, where money's here, and that's the whole thing. And
Sure.
It's just, that's what I always worry about, is because we're talking about an accounting entry to help financial statements, so it doesn't change our cash position at all, really. All it does is it's moving it into, in order to do this, we need to move it into an account for 2024, which takes away some of our flexibility. So that's what scares me a little bit here. That's just my my take on it.
And I'm going to go one more step further on that, because this harkens back to when you hit that June 30th and bills were getting paid or not paid, depending on which side of June 30th you were on. And so it would cause certain financial statements to reflect either positive in one year and then try and get caught up in the following year. That's not what's going on here. But we just have to be careful when that line gets drawn, it's accurate and reflects what happened. That's all.
So, Mike,
Hence, look at 2010 through 2013.
Right.
Mike,
And
did you say we could do this year and then look at other options in the future? Like, what would some of those other options look like, though?
Well, that's why I would need to go do some research. I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about other ways we could do it. And Chris and Joe and you guys, I can't argue the points you're making. They're great points. I totally agree with you. It's more restrictive. I think we have enough reserves. I personally, and you may not be, so that's okay. It's your call. I'm okay from a cash standpoint that I can recommend this to you from a budget standpoint. We're okay. But in terms of future years, I think it was Aaron, I think you were the one that asked the last question. The other options, and I would need to do some research. Right now, the only one, that I know is that you guys approve an operating deficit. And doesn't sound like something you guys want to do. So as it stands right now, we are cash, and this is the tentative budget. We really don't have many other mechanisms to play with. But again, an operating deficit in single form is different than a structural one. However, that's not something I wanted to recommend to you guys at this time. That being said, over the next month or coming months, I'm happy to do some further research and see if there's other options for this time next year. Absolutely.
I concur. We agree with, I think I'm speaking like I'm Chris and Joe rolled into one here, but we agree with what you're saying. The optics of this look more favorably if you're showing positive, you know, as it keeps going. And the case you made that the revenue timing was off due to a variety of reasons, and there was a sale of an asset. I just want to, you know, again, share that when we hit that line, and I'm looking at the two board members that'll be here next year when you hit that budget, you guys are gonna have a responsibility to make sure that you understand what stays in one year and what goes to the next year. So it doesn't tumble itself back in any way, shape, or form.
That's a good point. Thank you.
And I'll still take this conversation over a tax anticipation warrant conversation any day of the week.
This is a far more pleasurable conversation.
All right, if there's nothing else, I'll entertain a motion to approve the permanent interfund transfer resolution as presented.
I'll move.
I'll second.
A motion and a second. Linda, if you'd open the vote, please.
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
Thank you. Moving on to the concessions service agreement.
Included in your backup material is a concession service agreement between Crescent City Gourmet and Lincoln Way Community High School District 210. A little bit of background. We have a new athletic director at Lincoln Way Central, and he had met with his booster club to determine if they wanted to go a different direction at concessions. They have been in conversations with Crescent City to basically take over all the concessions for home events. Mike has worked with Bob Ward on this contract and with our board attorney to put this together. This would be a trial basis for 1 year. It would be just at Lincoln Way Central. As he worked with the Booster Club made additional recommendations that were added to the contract. We're bringing this forward because with Mike working with the attorney to say, hey, what do you think about this? They said this is something we would recommend the board approve. Some of the items in here, like the pay for a student if they decide to volunteer. If they volunteer and work, then Crescent City would pay the district $250 an hour for the student service. That was a recommendation from the Booster Club. We've had such difficulty finding people to volunteer to work over the last couple of years. I don't know if they would need to or not. This is something that the athletic director worked with the Booster Club. They would ask that we approve it. 7% of sales then goes back to the Booster Club. That would take away the burden of us finding our food service employees that would want to work on Friday night or Saturday. And really, this is a trial. Mike, is there anything else you would like to add? I know I kind of pieced that together, but is that kind of in a nutshell what brings that to the board this evening?
Yeah, no, I think you did a nice job. My work with the attorney, obviously we've vetted this from a liability standpoint, all the other legalese. We want to make sure we protect the district. But in our partnership with the boosters, boosters aren't a standalone entity, right? They're not a 501c3. And so they're under our auspices, and so therefore that's the reason for bringing it to you is legally speaking, it has to be through the board. Now, I did want to mention a couple of things. The volunteerism, we could provide volunteers anyway, but I think the intent from the boosters in Crescent City was to at least give a little money back from the boosters for helping find said volunteers. And then the 7%, I've had a lot of conversations with the Crescent City vendor, with Bob Ward, and with our attorneys on this. The 7% is of gross sales, and this is a trial basis, and it's only 1 year. I think the initial intent between boosters and Crescent City was to trial it for 2, just because of all the kind of upfront that needs to go into it. But from my standpoint, a 1 year is a safe trial for us as a district. 7% of gross sales, I think he had said it's not of net. A lot of times these agreements are of net, and of the gross sales ensures that the boosters, we're estimating, make at least in the ballpark, if not more, than what they would typically bring in, because sometimes they can't even run concessions. And so that's the spirit behind this. However, it's up to you guys to vote and approve tonight, so I don't have anything else to add.
I have a quick question. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Deidre.
Yeah.
Okay. So one of the questions I had is that what is kind of standard? You said standard is a percentage of the net, but what percentage have you, since this is new to us, I'm not familiar with it. What is the standard agreement is my first question that is, average when we talk about a percentage. And then secondly, is the $2.50 that they're going to pay per hour for each student, but the student still gets the volunteerism hours. That's the reason why it's like a reduced hourly, I'm assuming, because they're able to save on their staff.
Correct, and it's not like the kids aren't being paid the $250. That's just the amount.
Oh, no.
Boosters. But yeah, the kids can get volunteer hours. Correct, they'll get service hours. Now, to answer your other question about what is a standard is, I don't believe there is a standard. These arrangements, and again, if I had 10 other similar arrangements to kind of line this up against and say, well, call over District 230 or someone else, how do you do this? This is something that's newer, and like we said, it is a trial. I think it's something that the boosters wanted to do, just given each year, boosters, and a lot of you guys know, and some of you guys may have done this. And as my kids get older, I will do the same thing. But the boosters turn over, right? And so their kind of management turns over, and their volunteerism turns over. And so this is something they were looking to say: is this an opportunity that's more turnkey? There were times that
I'm sold on the idea. You don't have to. I wasn't kind of going down that road. I think it's a great idea. I just wanted to know those two things because I know that what you're saying. So I think it's a great idea. I just wanted to know what was kind of standard out there or what's the norm. That's all.
And this was initially slated at 5% between boosters and Crescent City, and I've kind of worked with Crescent City to get it up to 7%. And what we've agreed with Crescent City is at the end of the year, if this turns out to be very, very successful, we can reevaluate that percentage with the boosters.
Chris, go ahead, but don't ask my question.
Thank you.
So the issue for me, right, is if this is something controlled by the district, it should go through and it has to be approved by the board. It should be going through a process where the district is initiating this, looking at various vendors, comparing them. I understand, I think, Mike, you misspoke where this would make up the money, because if they took in, let's say, $32,000 in concessions last year, and their costs were a little bit lower. The volunteer thing is I agree, that's a complete issue. This is not financially probably going to be better because they're going to, and I don't know how Crescent City is going to make money, but I just have a problem with, the only way they're going to make money is they get the volunteers, and the labor costs are very low, and we're kind of transferring to, you know, to them. And again, the amounts are so small, but I just have a problem from the process standpoint. I just think, like, why wouldn't we look at this all around and, you know, for all three schools? And it's always kind of worked with volunteers. You always have that turnover. That would just be my take. I can guarantee you're not going to make as much money. It's 7%. Another problem is like 7% of gross sales just doesn't seem like enough. But we don't have any. The district didn't do any work on this, and now we have to be at the board level or being asked to approve it.
Well, I think you said the reason they're confident is because half the time they didn't have concessions last year. Was that the issue because they didn't have volunteers, or no?
I do not know that to be true. I mean, the
asking.
majority of that money is made on the football games, and you know, the majority of the concession money on boosters is driven by how many good weather football games you have. And to staff the other ones, I just don't know how you're going to make money. In basketball, you might be able to make a little bit on some of the bigger Friday night games. But, you know, in the contract where they did, I mean, I went to all the soccer games last year, right? And they're staffing it, but they're making like $100. Like, I don't know how you staff that for profit, right? Like,
You're saying that $7 back to the boosters from a typical soccer game isn't going to cut it. Okay.
I don't know how they're going to make money. Like, if this was handled on Crescent City.
Yeah, where did they come from? Like,
Who's Kyle Richardson?
So, the familiarity is they've run concessions for the New Lenox Rebels in the past. And so, similar setup, like we do not do concessions for baseball. He believes if he and one employee come and the Saturday doubleheader, they do hot dogs, they do brats, he thinks he'll make enough money to make it worth his while to come out and do a morning doubleheader. That's not something we have done. Soccer, I know sometimes they have concessions. There were times where they didn't, but you're right, Chris. You're talking maybe $100, $200. So this is something that they proposed, that they think this would be viable to do: soccer, wrestling, baseball, volleyball, and then whatever else comes up, if there's a Saturday track invitational. So as I said, I get it. If we went to a process where we wanted to look at all out, it's going to be a larger vendor. It's going to be a Quest Food Service. It's going to be somebody like that, and they're not likely coming to the table unless they're in our cafeterias, which would, you know, be a whole different conversation. But I do understand your point completely.
I mean, you asked where Kyle comes from, in addition to doing the Rebels. I mean, they've lived in New Lenox forever. I think all their kids went through 210.
Yeah.
And he was I believe he was a teacher at JUCO, culinary for a while.
Culinary instructor,
Yeah,
JUCO,
so-
junior college, yes.
I mean, I from a business perspective, I think he's got the downside. As long as we're properly insured, that's the thing that, I mean, I agree with Chris. I think he's gonna come and pound uncle. It'll be really good in August and September, maybe early October as the football season goes on. But then when he's taking on these other events, but he knows his business.
so this
Yeah.
isn't like a one-man operation. I mean, this is, you know, he's got
Yeah.
employees.
Yeah,
that,
he does the
Rebels.
Bologna, the Rebels. He's got,
well, the Rebels, I mean, how many kids are there on a Saturday compared to, you know, people here on a Friday night for football?
yeah, but again, this is, I guess, it's not his first endeavor of this
I just want to make sure we
magnitude.
have concessions on a Friday night.
Right, I agree with you. That's
You know,
what,
he calls up, sorry, I didn't, you know.
okay, but then the
Well,
other
it's-
option is if we don't approve this, and when's the first home game?
First two, so it'd be middle of September. We're not home at Central until middle of September.
Okay, so that gives them
Have a
30
month.
days
Have
to
a month.
pull this together,
Yeah.
to have somebody do this.
Is there any liability to the board because we didn't put this out for a bid or a proposal to other potential vendors?
Mike, you asked that question, I know, to the attorneys. What was the answer on that one?
I didn't hear the question, I'm sorry.
Liability because we didn't go to bid. This would not necessarily need to be bid, correct?
No, I did ask that question. This does not need to be bid. It would be a bid requirement if we were spending north of $25,000. This vendor, the turnkey nature of this, all the cost and risk is on him, right? It's his cost. We're not spending any money. So no, this does not need to be bid.
That's why I stated the liability, make sure he's properly insured and that it's paid for and
It
maintained.
says either party can terminate on 30
That's
days
good.
notice too.
Right.
We have his COIs already. I did ask for them in advance, just in case you guys were curious about that. He's provided all the certificates of insurance and is properly insured.
I mean, the other major risk is you just described as reputation risk then. You know, you have a major football game, you go up and there's 3 people in the concession stand. You know, and you're like, okay, the line's wrapped around the track twice and nobody can get a hot dog or a hot chocolate.
Well, he's
But
gonna get
but
volunteers.
did I hear we're still opening up the volunteerism? So
Correct, it's assuming
we're
there's
still having the
volunteers.
opportunity for the students to still volunteer, plus we have a concession stand.
Regardless you did this or not.
But the volunteers, they're prepared to staff it. The volunteers was.
They are
They
Crescent.
being Crescent
Right.
City is prepared to staff it. The volunteer was brought by our booster club saying, well, students still need hours.
I understood that, Scott. That's what I was saying. We have now 2 entities that can staff. We're looking
Correct.
at our students in addition to this company, whereas really we only had our volunteers.
Yeah.
So I just see a double coverage unless I'm seeing something differently.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, the thing, it's hard to get volunteers. The other schools are going to continue to do it. You're looking at, you know, the revenue and costs. You know, the boosters are making, you know, if you look at their financials, you know, it was 32 and 18 in cost. Before COVID, you know, they had good football games. It was 47 and 24 in cost. So if you multiply that 40,000 times 7, you know, that's $2,800. So it's not I don't think it's a financial decision for the boosters. It's more of, okay, if you give up on getting volunteers, that's what you're doing.
So then the boosters would have to think about, because they have those scholarships, but that's a whole other story. So
Right.
Well, they're planning to do other fundraisers.
Yeah, all of the other fundraising that the boosters do, and that was one of my questions too, and forgive me, I'm trying to track your voices. I don't know who made that point, but what their intent was with this is this alleviates their time and effort on something that they struggle to get together for all the different events, and they can then kind of more hyper-focus their attention. I think you're right that it's not, even if they don't make as much money, they're okay because they're going to dedicate all that additional attention and resources over, you know, on fundraiser A, B, and C over here. And I don't want to speak for them, so, you know, please don't quote me on that, but I believe that was factored into kind of the part of the consideration on this.
Yeah, it absolutely
Makes
is,
sense.
and we've spent a lot of time. It's the dollars here.
For a 1-year pilot, it might be worth a shot. The boosters asked for it. It's not like we're forcing it down their throat. I would approve this based on the fact that the boosters want it and hope they vet it and they can make their own bed.
it sounds
just-
like
he's just-
they just want to make sure we have, I'm sorry,
Go ahead, Deidre, I'm sorry.
that they just want to make sure we have concessions and take some of the burden and the responsibility off so that they can shift some of their focus to basically raise money in other ways.
I think that's fair. A fair assessment, yeah.
I make a motion to approve the contract for
I have a
Crescent City.
motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
A motion and a second. Linda, if you'd open the vote, please.
The vote is open. The vote is 4 yeses and 1 no by Mr. Lucetti. The motion passes.
Thank you. Moving on to the sale of real property for the property known as Lot 71, 20693 Grand Haven Drive in Frankfurt. Can we lump these together?
No, we have to do them separately.
Okay.
Because there'll be two potential separate motions if the board does approve any bids.
Gotcha.
So we'll have resolution 202211, which is lot 71. It has a minimum bid price of $40,000. The board can accept or deny any bid. So it'll be a closed bid process. I think we put in there, let's see, I forget the date, Linda, but it's the week of the next board meeting. The bids would have to be sent to us. Now, the good news is lots have been selling in the property. I've been contacted by their homeowners association that some of the builders are interested in finishing out there. And so lots have been going between $60,000 and $80,000. So I guess I'm asking the board for permission to go ahead and post these, and Mr. Kirking wants to hit yes. So that would be, first would be asked to approve the motion to go to bid for lot 71.
You don't want to hold on to these and speculate longer, Joe?
Will we put that in Fund 60?
That's a whole different discussion.
First of all, can I get a motion to approve
Good answer.
the proposed sale of lot 71, 20693 Grand Haven Drive in Frankfurt, Illinois?
So moved.
Second.
Is there any further discussion on this? Linda, if you'd open the vote, please.
The vote is open.
Aye. Yes.
Moving on. Oh, no, we gotta wait. I'm sorry.
Can't get it to work.
I thought.
The
didn't
vote
mean to
is
rush you.
unanimous. The motion
I'm
passes.
sorry, Linda, I didn't mean to rush you. I entertain a motion to approve the proposed sale of lot 72, 20689 Grand Haven Drive, Frankfurt, Illinois, as presented.
Nothing additional to add.
So moved.
Second.
A motion and a second. Linda, if you'd open the vote, please.
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
Maybe we get Crescent City to go sell concessions at the auction. All right, last on the action items, driver's education vehicle extension.
So, if the board recalls, it would have been a little bit more than 3 years ago, we entered into agreement with Phillips Chevrolet for leases of 9 cars at no cost to the district. They've agreed to continue that agreement for another year, and so we really appreciate our partnership. It's been outstanding. They bring the cars, they get the cars back, and even now that they don't have the volume, you know, at the time we entered this agreement, they had between 60 and 90 loaners on their lot, and now they're down to, you know, just a few. But they want to continue this partnership. They've sent us a letter indicating such. We would stay at around 12,000 miles annually on any vehicle, but typically what they do is once we get 4,000 miles, they bring us a different car and bring that one back and put it on the lot. So I would recommend that we continue our agreement and move forward as we've done here over the last 3 to 4 years.
I make a motion to approve the vehicle extension agreement with Phillips.
I have a motion. Do I have a second? Any discussion, questions? Linda, if you'd open the vote, please.
The vote is open.
No.
The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
Thank you, and thank you to Phillips Chevrolet for your
Absolutely.
continued support of Lincoln Way Community High School District 210. It's noticed and appreciated. Moving on to our informational items. Report of the Lincoln Way Special Education District 843 Governing Board meeting held on June 28th, 2022 and July 26th. Anything, Deidre?
I have nothing additional to report. I was at the June meeting. The July, I was away at a conference, but I don't have anything else.
Thank you. Moving on for FOIA requests. I don't believe there were any this month.
There were none.
Hot dog. Building and grounds.
Nothing additional to report. The report is in your backup materials. I'd like to introduce Chuck Welke. Chuck is our new District Director of Buildings and Grounds. So this is his first official meeting, and he'll be with us replacing Rich Wilkie.
Thank you, Chuck. Welcome. Glad to have you.
Welcome.
Moving on, asset of the month.
Asset of the month, asset name responsibility. Kids accept and take personal responsibility for actions and decisions at home. Talk with your children about school and learning at school. Actively engage your students with a variety of teaching methods.
Thank you. Quarterly health insurance report.
It's included in your backup material, as Mike had mentioned. We have kind of gotten back to some normalcy, but the report is in your backup materials.
Thank you. Legislative report.
Nothing additional to report at this time.
And the Tingley report.
Well, I put in your backup materials a new, some new requirements. So every school district will have to present a threat assessment screening tool and team to their ROE by the start of school. And that's something that just came about. But I put on as an example would be our threat assessment team and screening tool here at Lincoln Way Central. So that's in your backup materials for review. We'll be sending in versions from all 3 schools this week. Met with the Will County superintendents yesterday, Wednesday. Will County is now going to work to develop common language amongst all schools for instances of threats, for instances of armed intruders. For instance, Will County Police could be pulling up to any number of schools. You know, what is a soft lockdown? What is a hard lockdown? What does teach in place? So we're going to come up with common vernacular, and we're all going to use that then in our disaster planning. Now, they've assured us that we'll have that here within the next week or two to update our plans, get them back out. But this threat assessment is in response to what had occurred last spring in Detroit. This is something we have done in the past. We haven't had a formal tool as such, but we have, each building had their own team. This formalizes the process. The PDF on here is actually a checkbox. So it's a tool that they'll be able to sit and fill out as they're going through their meeting and screening the individuals. So something that I wanted to share with the board. We had our new teachers in yesterday and today. No, Tuesday and Wednesday. And we look forward to Opening Day Institute on Monday.
Excellent. And other business?
Scott, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead, Deidre.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Quick question. You said ROE. What does that stand for?
Oh, I'm sorry. Regional Office of Education. So, Regional
Thank
Office,
you. Okay.
yeah, they oversee all the schools in Will County.
Okay. And so this form is like a guide that even if a teacher or doesn't have to rise to a certain level, that anyone can kind of pull this out and then come together, I guess, with this, with the group, the team of administrators, school counselor.
That's a good question, Deidre. So any perceived threat that comes to staff, which I will discuss with the staff on Monday, any of these, any sort of threat, either veiled or unveiled, it has to go to administration, and then we have to convene a team and go through this tool. Now, in some cases, as you can see on those questions, they're going to determine pretty quickly, this is not a threat. We finish the report and move on. But in many instances, having a team come together, to have that student's counselor, to have a teacher, to have one of our mental health professionals is going to provide support and evidence to help make that decision of, okay, next steps. And I think that's what we had discussed last year when the tragedy did take place. There were so many missed opportunities. Probably shouldn't have come to the point that it was, that's why I think it's important that we are putting it in a structure and form. We've always had that, but now this has turned into the ROE and then also turned into the state of Illinois. So every school will have to have this turned in here in the next 2 weeks.
Okay.
But yeah, any threat, we would convene our team and go through the process.
Okay. All right.
And those teams, it won't always be the same people each time. It'll ebb and flow, but you must have law enforcement official, you must have a school health personnel, and you must have an administrator on that team.
And so Liquid Waste Central has turned theirs in. We're just waiting on the other 2 schools. Is that correct?
I have them. I put this on as a sample. Everything will be turned in to the ROE tomorrow by noon. Yep.
Okay, thanks, Scott.
Yep.
You other district business, I will appoint Rich Lacine and Beth Janice Doyle to review the closed session minutes from January through May of 2022.
I object.
You want to do it, Joe?
No, no.
Okay. All right, moving on. COVID loss mitigation plan for Community District 210.
I have a webinar tomorrow with the state of Illinois, and then I'll provide any updates for the September meeting.
Thank you. Any correspondence?
None.
And I don't believe we have anything in closed session this evening.
Correct.
With that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. All signify by saying aye.
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 The ayes have it. It's unanimous. Meeting adjourned. Thank you,
Have a
everybody.
good evening, guys.
Bye, Deidre.
Have a good night, guys. Thanks.
Thanks,
Michael.
Mike.